Good evening, sir, and welcome to LitAgra. We are happy that you could make it uh, this evening with us because despite you're not feeling well today since morning, and like when I got your call in morning that your health is not okay, so I was not very I couldn't insist a lot for you being here. But then it's a great honor and a great pleasure to have you here. Like Mohit has already talked about this book called Calculus of Power. I actually came to know about this book in 2019 when I was browsing about the books he has written, and somehow he was very reluctant to talk about it. I don't know why, but he himself was not very eager to talk about it. हाँ वो लिखी थी मैंने and like अभी तो मुझे पता नहीं copies हैं, and somehow I could locate there was a copy available on it. Just one or two copies were available. But then when I read this book, I was surprised with the kind of research that has gone into the writing of this book is amazing. So this is actually a selection of 18 American novels that actually represent America from 1890 to 1990. So almost a century of America has been covered through these 18 novels. And there are this book has various sections in which one of the section is war. So apart from that, there is a section on racism, and the titles of these chapters are also very interesting. That the title on racialism is Racial Rumblings, and the title which the chapter of war is titled as Theatre of War. So this book itself, Slaughterhouse 5, makes an appearance in this chapter, Theatre of War. So I would begin this conversation with him by first asking him that Calculus of Power is an attempt to understand the problems and the changes that are taking place in America through the study of selected fictional works. The selection of the 18 works that form the subject of your study must have been a daunting task. Was it so?
First of all, my warm greetings to one and all in LitAgra, and I am very delighted that you could commit the blunder of inviting me to talk about something which probably you thought would be different. Saurabh, basically when you talk about the daunting task, it is basically what happens, the tasks normally are all daunting. But if there is some kind of a passion, some kind of a love, some kind of an affection that you have for something, you don't see the daunting part of it. Selecting 18 novels, and let me just share with all of you here, it has a subtitle, Calculus of Power. The subtitle is Modern American Political Novel. So basically these 18 books, which I selected probably after going seriously through about 125 odd books, was a kind of a challenge in the sense because there are, like he said, there are 5 segments in that book, and each segment represents a vital part of American literature, culture and polity. So that was a challenge, like whether the book is representative or not. And I feel like and another thing which I feel is of great importance is reading through 125 novels would never have been a possibility unless the resources of the American Studies Research Center based in Hyderabad. Friends, outside America, it was founded sometime in 65. Outside America, that was the largest library you could think out of US on American studies. In those days, you just name a book, name a journal, and it was there because it was funded by the US government. So getting to read those books was a question of availability also. Because when you say, when you buy, there were very interesting, responses to how do you select a book or something. It can be sheer luck at times. It can be basically, when you feel that when you're trying to do some research, then it becomes a different kind of thing. So I was actually looking for the political part of these 18 novels. And it was, I think, a wonderful experience because working on those 18 books gave me an idea in totality of what America was, what America is, and what America can become. As we see through its literature, culture, polity, history. So that the challenge was there, because one more thing which I feel I will share with all the friends here is a statement which a French critic had made almost a century ago, when he said that all literature is about three things. First, the man. Second, the milieu. Third, the moment. So if you are trying to look into a book, basically you have to keep these three things in mind. And this is, something which I was very lucky to have read, because I had been a science student basically, and then when I switched over to literature, somewhere in those college days, I came across this statement, and I thought how wonderful it is that if you want to understand a book, these three factors are going to be of paramount importance. Because you cannot, the man is obviously the writer, maybe the characters also. Milieu is the environment in which you write. And moment is that particular historical moment. Because if you think of Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, and if you are not aware of the French Revolutionary history, probably that won't register. But this is, once you delve into it, just for your pleasure also, you will find, that the book is probably talking to you and saying, oh, you don't have to really throw me away. Take a look. And at times, it can be a matter of luck also. Like one of the books which I have included in this is Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. And, it was sheer chance. I was walking through the aisle of the college library. Suddenly I saw a title, Invisible Man. I had read H.G. Wells' The Invisible Man. And I said, it seems it's a different author and a different book. I opened the book, and in the very prologue, it's written by an African American. He writes, I'm invisible, not because people can't see me, but because people refuse to see me. I was simply bored. And these are the chances that probably come. I'm talking because, I've been in the same profession and all that, and I could have access to all that. But you see, when you read something like this, it hits you. That you refuse to see someone. Are we living in a world? If this kind of a thing does not sensitize us, then it really doesn't make any difference what book you read or don't read. And you see, when you talk of a good book, John Milton had described that a good book is the lifeblood of a master spirit, treasured and embalmed to life beyond life. And I'll give you an example what a book can mean. We have all gone through that terrible time of the COVID outbreak. I was, and this is again, something that really goads you on and urges you on. I read somewhere that when COVID broke out, in France, there were more people queuing outside bookshops to get a copy of The Plague by Albacam. And you know, the person who mentioned that, it was reporting basically, said that there were more queues outside the bookshops for Camus' The Plague than there were outside hospitals for a bit. So you can see, you know, this kind of a thing that tells you what a book can be about. And when you think of, let's say, a book like Slaughterhouse 5, can I talk about this or you would have some other question? When you look at, when he asked me, you know, why should somebody read Slaughterhouse 5? And then my counter query is, why should you not read about Slaughterhouse 5? You see, normally the mistake that we do is, and especially it has become very rampant in the age of Emperor Google. That you Slaughterhouse 5, just Google and you feel, you know, maybe I know a lot more than could Vonnegut about the novel. He may have not known all that. And it was Nani Palkiwala, the eminent jurist whom C. Rajagopalachari had said that he is God's gift to India. And he said that don't read the best books about the best books. Read the best books. You may find a book boring, you may find a book interesting, but basically you will have to ask yourself, you know, in Alice in Wonderland, I think most of you may have read. I'll take an analogy from there. Alice asks the Cheshire Puss or the cat, how do I go from here? And the Cheshire Puss says, where do you want to go? And she said, it really doesn't matter. And then the cat answers that if it doesn't matter where you go, how you go is of no consequence. So what you are looking for in the book, if it is you are going to do a serious reading, and by serious reading I don't mean that you write up a paper or write in a magazine or discuss in a group or something. If you can read a book which lifts you up, which simply, you know, like Mohit said, you know, which shakes you up. Now why Slaughterhouse 5 becomes important is, this is a book that shakes you up. Why? It is a war novel, you call it anti-war novel or whatever it is, but there is no mention of a single battle in it. No battle scene is described, and nothing of this sort occurs. You find, you know, it's a kind of a rambling and probably, you know, God knows what he's trying to say, because when you get into that kind of a mode of reading, you feel what is he, why can't he be very simple and about that? But my question is, if a man who has been a slaughterhouse, in the Slaughterhouse 5 as a prisoner of war, why did he take 23 years to say that there is nothing intelligent about a massacre? When you look at the massacre, actually what happens? We feel when we talk about war, whether it is Mahabharata or the First World War or whatever it is, we find that no matter what happens, no matter how much of loss, human loss is there and material loss is there, war is always glorified, whether it is in the Greek times or any time. And actually, as when I was doing my graduation, we had gone to Bangalore and Those days Bangalore used to be, one of the paradises of theatres. And then I was told that, there's a great movie which has come, Patton. And in that, it's just phonic and you can see this. I said, okay, let's go. Why I'm trying to emphasize this is that when the movie opens, you look at the back screen, the entire screen is filled with the American flag. And then a gentleman called General Patton. He comes to the center of the stage, stops there, and you know what are the first words of that general? He says, "No bastard ever won a war by dying himself for his country. The war has been won by making the other bastard die himself for his country." This glorification that you find over here is something which you'll find that it's a common thing. Even when you look at Slaughterhouse 5, just read the statement that President S. Truman makes, how he justifies the bombing of Hiroshima. And you know what how they justify. And basically it is not the general or military bureaucracy or something. It is basically how common people get involved and totally taken up by all that kind of propaganda. When the First World War began, it was told that this is the war which will end all wars. Okay. The First World War ended. And what happened in the First World War? If you look at the beginning, like Rupert Brooke, Wilfred Owen and all that, initially, and most of them were participant soldiers. They all became, party to it, and if you just think of a book like, say, All Quiet on the Western Front, and you see how heroism is developed, how people are brainwashed into believing whatever nonsense those in power want to inflict upon them. And these 4 students from one college, youngsters, they had a teacher, and that teacher told them, "Oh, I'm very proud that you are going out to the war front to lay down your lives if necessary for the country." But then what happens? One day they are sitting in the trenches. They have seen what war is like. They are sitting in the trenches, and the letter comes from that teacher. So one of the 4 has begun to read it. He read it, "You are all the iron youth of Germany." You know what one of the characters says? Youth. None of us are more than 16-year-old. But what is youth, we will never know. So when you find that, when you're reading a book, Mohit mentioned that Children Crusade. This query should come to your mind. Why is this reference there, Children Crusade? And you will see that it is not something which has been just brought from somewhere and put over there. If you read the book, you will find that there is a page on which a graphic description is given about the Children Crusade, how innocent children they were fired by the enthusiasm of dying for the glory of God and freeing Jerusalem. But these children, they were the ones who were bought by Germans and French and were sold as slaves. So you see what happens. I find that why I should ask somebody to read Slaughterhouse 5, and initially when he asked me the question, I said, well, it's very simple, unless you read this, you're not going to get any tea after the session is over. So that is one advantage of reading that book. But you see what happens. If you look at the whole book, you feel it is surrealistic, and the kind of technique that has been used, you don't feel very comfortable with it. But what I would suggest is, read through the book from first page to the last page. Anywhere you don't feel comfortable, leave that. It may be 20 pages. But anywhere you feel that there is a statement which is telling you how to see life closely without being a party to it. If you look at it, the answer will be there in the book. And you know, he says that for 23 years, because that experience was such. And for this again, I would like to sort of share one very important kind of thing. When we look at most of these novels which are written in France, Germany, England, USA, you see it, they're very unlike what goes on in India, because there you find that philosophy heavily dominates the national ethos. And when you find, like you see what happened, this may not be of importance to you as a book. There is a book which was published in the year 1890, titled Principles of Psychology, written by William James, the brother of the novelist Henry James. And it was in that book for the first time in the history of civilization that if the powerful metaphor of stream of consciousness was introduced. And you see, if you look at, because if you read this, any book that is dealing with stream of consciousness or magic realism or something, you'll probably get bored with it. Don't say what flash forward, flash back and all that is going on. But what the concept that he gave was, we are heroes, we are villains, we are cowards, we are patriots, all depending upon the actions we perform. But William James's book brought to front stage that it is not what you are performing in action that really defines your personality and character. You see, I may be, in an impulse, I may just go to the top of a mountain and jump from there. But maybe if I would have been given 5 minutes to think over, I would have said, all this nonsense, okay, let me go back. So what happens? In your mind, all these things are going on. And you know what happens? It was, you see how things, how theories, how literature, literary observations, how findings impact the writers. This was in 1890, but in the second decade of the 20th century, 3 people in 3 different countries who did not know each other, they were all experimenting with the idea of stream of consciousness. And Virginia Woolf, because most of you may have read Virginia Woolf, she says that life is not a series of gig lamps symmetrically arranged. Because when we are looking at a kind of a traditional kind of reading, we are looking for those symmetrically arranged gig lamps. She said that life is a luminous halo, a semi-transparent envelope that surrounds the mind from the beginning of consciousness to the end. So when you look at this book, you find that if you look at Google and other things, you say it's an anti-war novel, but you say he hardly talks about any war. But you see, if you look at the book, what should touch your curiosity is to note that he's using, which probably Saurabh had shared on a card or something. So it goes. And you know, so it goes expression comes 106 times in the book. Now, if you look at the rationale, why is he using so it goes, you will find that this is basically not about war or anti-war or something. It is about the existential concerns about death. Wherever you will find that so it goes is used whenever there is a death mentioned or evoked or referred to. And you find that this is something really amazing, but if you don't read that, how does it matter? So it goes. You say, I'm reading this book, so it goes.
We have a whole session coming on.
Okay, sure.
So, actually we have some people talking about this in detail. So I'd just like to ask you one more thing, that because these are a selection of 18 books, and in the chapter of Theatre of War, there are 4 books. So how would you compare the writing style and the themes that all these 4 authors have touched, be it Ernest Hemingway or Norman Mailer or Catch-22? How do they compare with this author?
When you see, when I made a selection of these 4 novels, first novel written in 1940 by Ernest Hemingway, For Whom the Bell Tolls. This is about Spanish Civil War. If you are interested in any major development in the 20th century, the Spanish Civil War will figure prominently. Because it was again after the beginning of the First World War that people thought that war was a chance to prove your mettle and to give your life defending a cause, number 1. So you find Robert Jordan, the hero, he is talking about all those ideals. The next book that I took up was Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. He is a participant. He has been among the bombardiers, and he mocks the whole justification that these military bureaucracy give about justifying a war. The third novel is titled Armies of the Night by Norman Mailer. And in this, it is again a non-traditional kind of a book, because it talks about the 4 days march against Pentagon in defense of Vietnam. So this is about Vietnam War, and obviously Slaughterhouse is the next one that comes in that order. So they are all different, they are using different techniques, different ideals, different historical, like man, movement and milieu, if you see, they are changing, though 3 books are in that 60s bracket only. Yes.
So, sir, we've seen so much of literature being produced about world wars and the wars and the problems that have taken place in the Western world. We have had our own share, in India we have our own share of the problems and the tragedies. How do you feel that, do we have learned anything from the techniques that the Western writers have used, or have we actually done justice to by talking about those tragedies?
As Indian writers, you mean?
Indian writers.
Well, we are wish for gurus. We don't need anybody to teach us anything. We are all born writers.
True, very true.
You see, basically what happens when you say this, I'll give you one example. Atrocities, pain, cataclysms, apocalypse, all these things happen. And there have been writers in English, in Hindi, and in those Bhasha literature, so to say, who have taken up many of these issues. But as I told you, if you compare with the European setting, that organized kind of a view which the universities, the laymen and the normal reader, scholar, they all try to give you is totally of a different nature. They talk about, like I told you, like if you have not heard about William James, but I don't say that Indians can't do it. If you have read in your school a story like Chandradhar Sharma Guleri's Usne Kaha Tha, it is a word story and you feel very touched by it. Basically, then you have books like Khushwant Singh's Train to Pakistan, Chaman Naos Azadi dealing with partition, and so on and so forth, Monto, Isman Chugtai and everything. But actually what happens, when you are talking about calamities, we tend to sort of see it from a different perspective. Is a Hindu writing it? Is a Muslim writing it? Is he pro-government? Is he anti-government? Is he patronized by the media? Is he going to get an award? But what I appreciate, that despite the stand, which this is what I've learned from working on this American political novel, that despite the stand that the government takes and justifies whatever it can to carry on its agenda, there have always been courageous writers. You see why this book is important. I mean, you will be discussing all this because it involves Dresden. And what about Dresden? I read somewhere, that in 1755 some writer had told about Dresden, where beauty was invented. So that beautiful town, which had nothing to do with any war industry and all that was bombed by American bombers, and in a matter of days, 135,000, this is what the figure, what Vonnegut says. Yet, he says, when I looked at the 27 volumes of history of war, Dresden is not mentioned there. So if a writer has the courage to wait for 23 years and he brings this to, and because it was only through him that Dresden, because if a writer can, change the contours of the thought about a war, I think that's his great contribution. Yes.
So I think this is something like great to know about the Dresden, and all I would like to add here is that the book that he has been mentioning, The Calculus of Power, it has been listed in American Congress Library and British Council Library, British Museum Library. So this is a book which has been kept there, and it figures along with the writers like Ralph Ellison, Toni Morrison, and several Nobel Prize winner authors. They are actually the list of the catalogue that came to me was a surprise because he's the only Indian author who figures in that list.
You will be very amused to learn that this I came to know day before yesterday from Saurabh. He said, "You never said this." I said what? I said, "Oh, well, I don't know."
Actually, I was just scanning the list and it was very prominent that no Indian has ever figured in that list. Really strange. But then it's an honor to have him here. Just one last question that I have is that, the most of the themes are being taken up by the members here. Do you really think that...
First of all, I must congratulate everyone who's made an attempt, who's going to make an attempt to make a presentation on this. And You see why I appreciate this? Because when you are making a presentation or writing something, you rediscover things about yourself. And that is why writing is very important. And that is what I would always say, that no matter if you like any good book, just jot down your ideas about it and keep on thinking about it, try to connect it with life problem. Not in isolation, that it is put for the shelves in the library and we don't have anything. Yes, Saurabh, sorry for it.
Yes, okay. So there's idea of free will that has been expressed in this book. Would you like to tell something about that?
Free will. Well, you see, if you read this Slaughterhouse 5, you are informed that in Transformador they don't have free will. It's only the earthlings who are concerned with free will. Now, Saurabh, basically I would like to sort of ask you that what exactly is free will? Now, if you look at, to understand this, you can take two sides to it. The first side is free will means that you are not a conditioned human being. Like the Transformadorians, they're doing it. You're not conditioned. You have the capacity to make a decision. Because you see, there are two ways. Either everything is in the hands of God, or everything is in the hands of individual. For example, I think most of you in school must have read these plays by Shakespeare, where Cassius says to Brutus in Julius Caesar that when you are talking about, he says, the fault, dear Brutus, lies in our stars and not in ourselves that we are underlings. That means whatever is decided by the star. And then in King Lear, Shakespeare says, as flies to wanton boys are we to the gods. They kill us for their sport. Now you see, when you are caught between these two things, and this is not merely a matter of opinion, there is entirely a very deep rooted kind of a philosophy coming from the French writer Jean-Paul Sartre and your Søren Kierkegaard. Both of them agree on one thing. Because you see, when you look at the developments in the 20th century, you find that after the Second World War, what actually different had happened. People had been disillusioned even in the First World War. Like when Hemingway was told by Gertrude Stein that you are all a lost generation. But it was after Second World War, these concepts came up, God is dead, the novel is dead, the author is dead, everything is dead. And you have people like Nietzsche coming and saying, yeah, not to be born is the best for man, and to die young is the next best. So these are the kinds of nihilism that you find over there. But then where do you find the hope? The hope is there because you may have probably read, most of you may have read Beckett's Waiting for Godot, which is again a very complicated kind of a play. So what happens, you find that you have these choices in life. You know that life is meaningless, but it is offering you choices. So you think, okay, I will choose this. But the problem of choosing is, the moment you choose, you are bound by the consequences. You cannot get out of it. You cannot say, "Arey nahi, humne to choose kar liya tha, ये तो गलती से कर दिया." So all these things, if you look at it, and free will again means that you are not conditioned by any power, human or divine. And most wonderful example is Lord Krishna, when in the Battle of Kurukshetra, he talks to Arjun and tells him everything, and shows him everything, shows his own form and capability and everything. But in the 18th chapter, he tells Arjun, कि whatever I had to make you understand, I have done that. अब वो करो जो तुम्हारा विवेक है. So having this vivek and the guts to take the responsibility, this is where the free will part comes. Now if you look at the, again I think some of you must be talking about it. If you look at the novel, I give you an example of, hello. Sorry. I give you. I gave you the example of how the choices are made and how these pattern Truman and all that, how they justify these wars. But one part in the novel, and I must thank LitAgra and Saurabh and Mohit for one thing, for making me read this novel
Again.
after such a long time. And I feel that maybe by looking at only the political angle, there are so many things left unsaid, and I must do some serious writing on many of the things which probably I'm going to hear from you and which I've been sharing with you. So one of the things which I've admired in the whole book is so touching. Like there is a character called Mary O'Hare, who's also been included in the dedication. Mary O'Hare is very angry with him because she tells him that you old people, you'll be writing about wars and justifying wars, and I hate all this. And you will create something in which Frank Sinatra and John Wayne will be acting, and they'll be in the Hollywood, and all that glory will be given to them. But you know what he says? That I give you my word of honor. This is something which really touched me. I give you my word of honor that if I write something on the Dresden, it will have no place for Frank Sinatra and John Wayne. And the next thing that he tells is, I have told my sons, no matter what, do not side with anything where war is justified, and do not work for any establishment which creates the weapons of destruction. So you see, if you don't read the book, you will miss all this. And if probably I've been able to infuse some enthusiasm, I'll feel honored, and if not, you know whom to catch for wasting your time.
Absolutely, any day. So I'm sure, sir, many of us are looking forward to read this book. If we haven't, it has been a great pleasure listening to you. Your views have actually influenced many of us, I'm sure. But now, the way we conduct the book, it's going to be done in your presence. Thank you for being here, sir. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Such a silence.
Even if